All right, I believe we are live everywhere we need to be. I appreciate everyone joining us this evening. Um, as I say, this is our Bible class for Wednesday night, September the 30th. We are studying about the book of Exodus, as we've been doing in our class on Wednesday night. So again, appreciate everyone joining us tonight. We're going to go ahead and just share the screen if I can find it, and we'll go ahead and get started talking about our lesson. As said, tonight we are studying from Exodus chapter 3. We are looking at God's word to Moses and what God would have them to know and what they'd have them do. Remember last week we talked at Exodus 2 about the birth of Moses and about his coming into being born in Egypt and being found by Pharaoh's daughter and what all that entailed and what all that included of that life he lived for a while or a time in which he was able to enjoy the pleasures of the Egyptian household. And then later, after he killed the Egyptian, he was forced out of Egypt, or he left Egypt because he knew Pharaoh knew this. And we find out from Stephen, as he said in Acts 7, that this was Moses' first attempt of trying to free Israel. This was Moses trying to free Israel on his own. Again, this would have happened about the age of 40. Then we pick back up in chapter 3. Now, it's very interesting, the timeline of Genesis, because, again, if we were writing the book today and we were writing the book of our own information or recording history, we would probably want to fill in more information of this. Because chapter 2 jumps from Moses being 3 months old to Moses being 40 years old. And then chapter 3 jumps to Moses being 80 years old. So we'd like to know, okay, what happened to Moses during those times? What brought Moses this place? And what was Moses doing? What was Moses like before he was chosen by God? But God didn't include that information for us. Again, I think that's probably more information than we need, than was required. God gives us what we need to know. And so we pick back up at Moses at the age of 80. Moses at the age of 80, he is in the land of Midian. And as he's in the land of Midian, he has now went from being a Pharaoh's, the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, to being a shepherd. And so we pick up that in Exodus chapter 3. We pick up in verse 1. It says, now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is burned, or why the bush is not burned, excuse me. So notice first, Moses here, as I said a minute ago, has become a shepherd. He is working for his father-in-law, Jethro. We're told his father-in-law earlier in the last chapter was Ruel. And some will try to take an issue with that and try to find out and say that this is from two different sources. The story is not kept straight. But the easiest explanation is, like most of the other characters in the Bible, that Ruel or Jethro had two names. And so Jethro had two names that he was referred to. One was Ruel and the other was Jethro. And so Jethro was the priest of Midian. Now, some will ask the question of the priest of what? Some have tried to say he was a pagan priest, but most likely from what we see in the book of Genesis, especially later in chapter 20 or so, we're going to see that Jethro was apparently a priest of God. And this is not far-fetched because the tribe of Midian was descended through Abraham. If I remember right, I think Midian comes from Abraham's second wife or third wife, if you count Hagar's wife, but his second official wife of Keturah. And Midian come through that line. So there's a very good possibility that just as Abraham's faith passed down through Isaac in that family line, through the children of Sarah, there's a very good possibility that the children of Keturah also had this same teaching. And so this was another descendant of Abraham that was from, again, 450 years before, began this tribe of Midian, or this people of Midian. But no matter what, apparently he is a priest. He is a priest. And again, exactly what kind of priest, we don't know. We've seen a priest that wasn't an Israelite before. And earlier in the book of Genesis, we've looked at Melchizedek. He was a priest that was the king of Salem. And he will be a figure later. Jethro is a figure that's used here that pops up a little later in this account to teach Moses a very important lesson. And so Jethro was, again, apparently a man of God. And so we again see Moses as being a man who recognized his heritage as being part of the tribe of Israel, being part of the Israelites, but also being connected to this other man who is a priest of God as well in a different land. And so Jethro is the one that's priest of God. And so Moses is taking his sheep and he's leading his sheep down to the west side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb. He's taking this in what's called the Sinai Peninsula. Now, when it says he came to Horeb, the Mount Horeb is also another name for Mount Sinai. It's the exact same mountain. Again, we're not exactly sure why it's referred to in two different names, but Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb are the same mountains. It's described as a mountain of God. And so Moses is wandering with the sheep. He's shepherding the flocks. He's got them feasting. And as he's there in verse 2, the angel of the Lord appears. And he appears in this flame of fire. A flame of fire in the midst of a bush. And again, this is one of those interesting descriptions in the Bible that I know a lot of preachers, a lot of Bible class teachers have often thought and wondered what this must have looked like, what this must have appeared to be a burning bush that doesn't burn up. And again, we see a very important person here in verse 2, the angel of the Lord's here. This angel of the Lord we've talked about before. This is some kind of messenger from God, but he is a special angel, or at least given a special role, in that he will speak for God. He will speak as God. And again, that could be a very similar thing of this. The role of an angel was simply a messenger for God. But there's this angel Lord who's in the flame. He is in the bush and causing this flame that doesn't burn the bush. And Moses looks and he sees the bush was burning and it was not consumed. And in verse 3, Moses says, I will turn aside to see this great sight. I will turn aside. I will go here and I'll look at this bush. I want to know why this is happening. It's sort of like the idea of us. We realize this curiosity, don't we? If we're going down the road and we see police lights or an ambulance on the side of the road, what we do, we always want to turn and look and say, okay, well, what's going on there? What are they doing? We're curious. Or we see something that draws our attention. We look at it. We stare at it. That's very similar to what Moses does. Moses finds this bush. He sees a burning bush. And I imagine a burning bush was an oddity in itself, just beyond the wilderness. And then on top of that, you have this bush that's burning, but it's not being consumed. And so Moses goes aside. And what we see here is this plays a very significant spot, in that this is one of the few miracles of the Old Testament. We typically think about the New Testament. We think about it as a book of miracles and look at Jesus and what he's able to do and the apostles. And those are great things. But when you look at the Old Testament, when miracles occur, they were occurring for a very special, for a very specific purpose. They had reason behind them. There was something that was going on. And typically when you see miracles, the only time you really see miracles are here in the beginning of the Exodus. And God showing the people who he is. You see him with the prophets, especially Elijah and Elisha. And there's a couple more places, but the miracles are very few and far between. But when they do show up, they're used to show, as we're going to see a little later, that the person doing the miracles is a messenger from God. And that's the same and true as the New Testament. When Jesus and the apostles do it, this is to prove they're from God. Their message is true. So Moses sees this miracle and he turns to the side to check out what it is. We pick back up in verse 4. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called out and he called to him out of the bush. Moses, Moses, he said. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So here you see Moses turns to the side to see this bush. And when he goes to look at this bush to see how it burns and see what's going on, see if he can figure out what's happening here, the bush calls out, a voice calls from the bush. It calls out, Moses, Moses. And again, this is a very interesting part that it calls out twice. This is very similar to Abraham. When Abraham is called, he'll be called Abraham, Abraham. And then later, when Samuel is called in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and 3, God will call him twice, Samuel, Samuel. And the idea there's an emphasis in repeating that word, and repeating that name to make sure that person gets the point. This is for them. And God comes out and Moses responds, here I am. Here I am. What do you need? And is basically the idea. Moses is afraid of what's going on here. And then God speaks to him and tells him to take his sandals off. He takes the sandals off because he's standing on holy ground. Now, the idea here is not that the ground is holy because of something that's happened in the past, or this ground is going to be holy for the rest of the life, or rest of the time of earth. But the idea is that this place is holy because God is there. Because God is there, that this is holy ground. This is a holy spot. And therefore, you're to take care when you do this. And what's interesting about this idea is this sets a precedent for coming times. Because in later times, when people would enter into a holy place, such as the temple and other times, we'll see that there'll be references of people taking off their shoes to enter into the holy place, or to enter into the temple, or enter into some kind of holy ground. And this is that idea where this probably originates, is God telling Moses, take off your sandals because you're standing on holy ground. And then God speaks to him. He says, I am the God of your father. And again, I'm the God of your father, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That this is the God, that I'm the God who spoke to Abraham. I'm the God who gave the promise to Abraham and to all his descendants, and even to you. And it says when Moses hears this, he hides his face. He hides his face, for he's afraid to look at God. He was awed in the presence of God. And I've often wondered what that must have looked like. That bush must have been like for Moses to have seen it and to hide his face from it, to be afraid of seeing God. And we see that later why he would be afraid, because what would happen when someone tried to look on the face of God. But God is speaking to him from this bush, and Moses is astonished. He's amazed at what's happening. And here he is standing before God, and God calls out to him. He says, I am the Lord your God, or I am the God of your father, excuse me. And then from here, we get the next verse, verse 7. In verse 7, we begin to see how God speaks to Moses. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. So you notice that God says to Moses, I have seen the affliction of my people, and I've heard their cry. God says, I know about my people. I've seen them, I've heard them, and I know their suffering. He says, I have seen this, I have heard this, I know this. Now I'm acting on this. And this goes back to chapter 2, where God says, I have remembered my people. And then again, God has chosen to take action. God has chosen to do something. And so he says here, I'm going to come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. I've come to bring them to a new land, the land I promised them, a land flowing with milk and honey. And the idea here, milk and honey, is the idea of milk being prosperous, of being from the livestock, from the cows and the goats. The honey being either, and there's some discussion, either the honey from bees, or sometimes in the ancient world, there was the juice from a grape and a date that was squeezed a certain way. They called that honey. But either way, this term milk and honey was a term for fertility, a term that describes a fruitful land, a growing land. And God says this land is flowing with it. And the idea of the flowing with the milk and the honey means this land was prosperous. This land was able to produce. And to show you just how prosperous this land is he goes on in that very same verse to say, here's there's people already in the land. The Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. We could talk about all these people, but we're not for now because we're going to run into them later. But he says there's people living in that land, and it's going to give us a foreshadowing of what's going to come in the coming books of the Bible. And that God says, I'm going to bring in this land, but there's people here. There's going to have to be something done to these people. They're going to have to be removed before you can take your place. And then verse 9, he says, now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Now, you notice verse 9, if you go back, I probably should divide this better. Verse 7 and verse 8, verse 7, repeat the same phrase that's seen in verse 9. Notice, I've seen the affliction of my people and have heard their cry. Verse 9, I behold the cry of my people, and I've seen the oppression. What this is this is a repeating of this phrase. This is what's called a chiasm. This is done to prove a point, but the point is that it repeats a pattern. If you could lay this out, it would be A, B, C, B, A. A being the idea of I have heard their cry because of taskmasters, or A being certainly seen the affliction of my people. B, heard their cry. C, I've come down to deliver them. And I've come down to deliver them parallels with I bring them out of the land of good and honey. Then the idea that I've heard their cry echoes again. I've heard the cry of my people come before me. And then also I've seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. This is God again emphasizing that he knows what his people are going through. He has seen his people and what they're suffering, and he is not blind to it, but God is worried about it, and God is going to take care of them. And so God says, this is what I'm going to do. He tells Moses, come, I will send you to Pharaoh. I'm going to send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. I'm going to send you to Pharaoh. You're going to deliver my people. And then in verse 11, if you watched FBI last night, we talked about this same chapter in brief survey. Moses gives one of his 5 excuses. In the next 2 chapters, we're going to see Moses give God 5 excuses of why he cannot lead Israel. And the first excuse is here when he says, who am I? Moses says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? What good, what mighty, what strength, what dignity, what honor of a person am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Why is Pharaoh going to listen to me? Why is Pharaoh going to respond to me? Why is Pharaoh going to hear me? And so Moses takes this stance, and some have said this is a stance, an excuse of God. Moses trying to get out, and it could be, but it can also be the idea to show that not does Moses have an excuse, but Moses is not over bragging. Moses is not overconfident in saying, oh, well, I'll lead them out. Remember Moses, Stephen tells us in Acts 7, Moses tried 40 years earlier to lead Israel out, and they wouldn't follow him. It's not like Moses saying, oh, well, God, I tried it the first time, but I'll try it again with you. No, Moses has a sense of servility, a sense of humility to him, in that he says, who am I that I should go? And he knows verse 12, God replies to him. He says, who are you? I'll be with you. And the idea that I will be is a play on the words we're about to see in the next few verses. Remember, God's going to later say in this very passage, when Moses asked the next excuse, actually, we're going to look at the next verse, is who are you? He asked God, who are you that they're going to listen to me? God says, I am that I am. The idea of I will be is a form of the Hebrew word I am. Is a part of that same verb family. I am and I will be are the same verbs. They're just future tense and present tense. So God has a play on the word here when he says, I will be with you. And that says, and then he tells Moses, he says, this will be a sign to you. Now notice this. This is not a sign to the people, but a sign for you. This is a sign for Moses. And notice what God says. He says, I'm going to take you into Egypt. You're going to set my people go. They're going to come out of Egypt. And we're going to come back, and they're going to come back to this mountain. They're going to come back, and they're going to serve God on this mountain. He says, that's going to be a sign to you, a sign that I'm the one who delivered you. A sign that what I have said to you is true, that what I have told you is correct, and what I have done is what's going to be. And so Moses and God continues in the next verse of this chapter. Verse 13, then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And so here Moses says, if I go. Now notice this, it's not when I go, if I go. Moses is again trying to get out of this and trying to say, well, God, who are you? And this is what some preacher, some Bible guy from ages before come up with these excuses where he asks God, who are you? Who are you, God? And what's interesting about this is this plays into the Hebrew idea of the book of Genesis. And it plays into the idea that every time God appears, whether it's to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, when God comes and makes these statements, God comes and speaks to someone, he gives them a form of his name. He gives them a form of his name that is connected with his power, that's connected with what he's about to. It's a name that's going to tie them back to God. That's going to tie them back to that person and the promise God made to that person. And so Moses is basically saying to God, you've come to Abraham, you come to Isaac, come to Jacob, and you gave him a name. What name are you going to give me? What name can I say that the people will believe me? The people will understand me. And then verse 14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. This word is 4 letters in the Old Testament. The Old Testament word is Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, basically YHWH, the word of Yahweh. And this, God says, this is my name, and this is the covenant name of God. When God is referred to and God speaks, this is going to be his official name is Yahweh or Jehovah. Jehovah is a form of Yahweh, just an older form of when some German scholars, when they translated the word of Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, instead of translating it with Y and W, translated with a J and a V. But it's the same idea. And then he says, say that I am who I am. And he says, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me. And again, God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Notice God says to Moses here, I am. I am who I am. Tell them that I am sent you. I am God. And then you look at verse 15, he says, tell them that I am the Lord, the God of your fathers. Again, notice the idea, the implication here is God saying that I am the God of your Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob. I am the God of your fathers. Not I was the God, where we may use that term, I was the God of Abraham. I was the friend of so-and-so who may have passed. But God uses it in present tense where he says, I am. I am that God. I am that same God. And God is using this covenant name to prove who he is. And he says, this is my name forever, and thus I'm to be remembered throughout all generations. Now, just a little side note here, we're talking about this name of God. One thing I always want to point out is that if you read your Bible and you notice the word Lord, L-O-R-D, and you see it either in all capital letters or capital and what they call small capital letters, you'll notice it says Lord, and it's all capitals either way. And what it is this is when the name of God is used. And this was done because the Jews, when the Jews would copy the word of God, they copy it exactly, but when they read it in the synagogue or they read it in the temple, Well, they come to the name of God because of the fear of the Ten Commandments, not to use the Lord's God in name in vain. Instead of saying Yahweh, they would say the Lord. They would say the Lord said. And so this has been a way that people have translated through the years. But if you see the capital Lord in the Old Testament, then that is a sign that this is what's called the name of God. The Tetragrammaton is another way that's described, a four-letter word. And so this is that name that God says, I'm giving you, Moses. You go and tell the people, this is who I am. This is the one who has spoken to you. This is the one who is calling you. And then you notice that this is my name forever. Forever I am the God. And the idea is that pre-existing and that always existing nature of God is seen in these beautiful words. And so he goes on from there to go to the next verse, verse 16, where God says, go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers Abraham, or the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob has appeared to me saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Hittites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. Again, God tells Moses, you go gather the elders of Israel. Go get the people, get their leaders, and tell them that God is about to deliver them. That God has heard them. God has seen them. And God is promising to bring them out. God, just as he promised Abraham, he would be a great nation. Just as he promised Abraham, he would save his people. Just as he promised he would deliver the people. He says, this is what I'm going to do for you. And he says, I'm going to bring you out of this land. I'm going to take you to a land that's flowing with milk and honey. Again, God doesn't sugarcoat. It doesn't say, I'm going to take you to a land flowing with milk and honey where nobody's there. But he says there's people there. I'm going to take you to another people's land, and I'm going to give that land to you. And again, that requires some fighting. That requires some work. It's going to require something on the part of the Israelites to take this land. But God says it's yours if you'll just follow me. If you'll just go with me and obey me and follow the promise. And so you notice verse 18, and then they will listen to your voice. You and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now, please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing, you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so that you shall plunder the Egyptians. Now, notice this outline. Before we talk about these verses, I want you to see something in these verses. God is telling us, foreshadowing what's going to happen in the following chapters. Beginning in chapter 4, we're going to see Moses go to the elders. Then from chapter 4 to chapter 6 or 7, Moses is going to talk to the elders and describe to them what he's here to do, what God's plan is. Then in about chapter 7, we're going to see Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh. And you notice God tells Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you unless compelled by a mighty hand. And God proves that. And that God, from chapter 7 to about chapter 12, God is having to show his strong hand. He's having to show Pharaoh who he is. And then in chapter 12 and 13, we see the end of this come to fruition, where the Israelites are going to plunder the Egyptians. They're going to plunder them when they leave. Now, that's the basic overview. Let's go back and let's talk about this, what God says is going to happen. Notice God says, go to the king of Egypt, go to Pharaoh. And he is going to go, and he says that the Lord, tell him that the Lord has come to you and has told you that this is what I want to do. And some people look at this and say, well, is this a lie? Is what God tells Moses to tell the Pharaoh, what Moses tells Pharaoh, is it a lie? God told him before that God says, I'm going to set you free. I'm going to take you completely out of this land. But here God says, tell Pharaoh, we're going to go for a 3 days journey and have a feast. Now, what they're asking for, this is what we're going to see that Moses is going to ask Pharaoh for. What he's asking for is basically about 2 weeks to go do this. He wants to go a 3 days journey to get away from Egypt, to get out of the land. He's going to say contaminated land, to go to another land. to travel 3 days to get there. He's going to have a feast, a sacrifice, and the feasts and sacrifices typically last a week. When we look at the Old Testament, all the feasts that we have, they typically last a week. So they say, let us go and have 7 days of worship to our God. Then at the end of those 7 days, we're going to have to come back to you. And when we come back to you, it's going to take 3 more days to get here. So he's asking for 2 weeks to be gone. And this is what he's asking. And some people will say, well, God said he's going to set them free. Why does he ask for 2 weeks here? Well, what this is this is a bargaining chip. This is a thing to set something in Pharaoh's mind, because if God would have come to Pharaoh, Moses come to Pharaoh and said, God said, let my people go. We're leaving and never coming back. Pharaoh would have fought them harder than ever. But this is said to not make Pharaoh be as completely offensive or completely defensive, so that he will listen to what Moses and the people ask for. And so they asked to be able to go into the wilderness to sacrifice to God. And then verse 19, one of the most interesting verses in the call of Moses is God says, I want you to go talk to Pharaoh, but Pharaoh's not going to listen. Now, some of the other prophets have had very similar situations. There are other prophets who God says, I want you to go and speak to this people, but know beforehand, these people are not going to listen to you. But they still need to hear. Here, God told Moses, he says, I want you to go to Pharaoh. I want you to tell him to let your people go, to let us go worship me. He says, but God, I know Pharaoh will not let you go. Notice, Pharaoh will not let you go unless he's compelled. Unless he is compelled, unless he is shown that he's not the one in charge, that compelled by a mighty hand. Unless he is revealed to him that there's someone else over him, that someone has more power than he has. And then God says, I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt. That idea of stretching out the hand is a sign of judgment, a sign of condemnation. It's used in those places in the Bible, where God says, I'm going to strike my hand, reach my hand out and strike Egypt. And notice, this is the interesting thing about this. What God is telling Moses that he's going to do is God says, I'm going to stretch out my hand, and with the wonders I'm going to do, Pharaoh's going to know who I am. What's interesting about this is most of the time when we think about the Bible, we think about wonders or miracles or signs of God. We think about healings, raising the dead, the casting out the demons, calming the storm, things that were either neutral or good. But here, God's going to do something that's going to cause heartache. It's going to cause pain. It's going to cause suffering. But it's still called a wonder. It's still called a miracle. And God says, when I do what I'm going to do, Pharaoh's going to let you go at the end of it. And then you notice he says in verse 21, when I let you go, when Pharaoh lets you go, he says, you're going to plunder Egypt. You're going to take back some of the gold and silver you deserve. You notice he says, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house. Now this is an interesting thing, this phrase I just read sometimes causes people heartache or trouble, because we just read that the Israelites were slaves. The Israelites were in hardship. They had a heavy burden, but yet he says there's women living in their houses. And the idea of that phrase, any woman who lives in her house, is a phrase that is typically used to describe a servant. So what we see here is that there were certain Israelite houses that had slaves in it, meaning there were Israelites who were well-to-do, who were better off than others. And this is not unheard of. This wouldn't be completely out of the ordinary. That not all of Israel, being again nearly 2 million people, 1.5 to 2 million people, there's bound to be some of them who were prosperous, who had a house, who had a household, and they had slaves themselves. But God says, and all these people, the women, their neighbors, their servants, if any of them, they have jewelry or gold or clothing, they're going to give it to you. They're going to hand it over to you. And this is the way you're going to plunder Egypt. You're going to take Egypt's goods away from them, not by stealing it, not by fining them, not by killing them, but by them willingly giving it over to let you go, to get you out of there. And we see this happens because of the 10th plague, because of the death of the firstborn. It's such a devastating plague that the Egyptians are willing to do whatever it takes to get rid of Egypt, of the Israelites. And God tells Moses, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to watch over you. I'm going to save you. I will be there. Again, I will be, because I am. I am that I am. And this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to save you. And again, God lays out what's going to happen in the coming chapters. The elders are going to meet. They're going to hear Moses out. Then those elders and Moses are going to go to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let us go to worship our God. Pharaoh's going to refuse. God's going to send the mighty wonders. And at the end of those mighty wonders, the people of Israel are going to send the people of Egypt, are going to send the Israelites out with plunder. They're going to plunder the Egyptians without ever raising a sword or without ever having to steal a piece of jewelry from them. God says, this is what I'm going to do, Moses. This is what's going to happen. And you are going to be the one that's going to lead them out. You're going to be the one that leads them out of this. And this is what we're going to see next week. Next week, we're going to go to Exodus chapter 4. We're going to finish the call of Moses. I told you there are 5 excuses. So far, we've looked at 2, where Moses says, who am I and who are you? And then he's going to give God 3 more excuses. Those first 2 may not be as much excuses as they are just questions. These next 3 are plainly excuses for Moses saying, I cannot do this. There's no way I can do this. As a matter of fact, he's going to come to the 5th one and tell God, please get somebody else to do this. But God's going to say, no, Moses, you can do it because I'm with you. You can do it because I'm the one who has set you aside. I'm the one who has determined what you're going to do. I'm the one who's going to accomplish all these things, and you're going to accomplish this by me. That's chapter 3 of Exodus. I'm going to give just a second if anybody in here wants to make a comment or have a question. All right, I don't see anybody make anything. Appreciate everyone joining us tonight. Remember, Sunday morning at 10 a.m., we have our worship service. Then remember, on Tuesday night, we have our FBI class at 7. We have this class at 7 on Wednesday night. And appreciate everyone being here. We're going to end the live stream now, so appreciate those who joined us there. Hope you all have a good week, and thank you for being